Question 1. Investigation of the most effective strategy for Elior Group to integrate new sustainability criteria into its existing procurement processes, considering the need for supplier adaptation and internal team understanding. Option A. Assign responsibility for implementing the sustainability criteria to individual procurement managers, allowing them to interpret and apply the policy as they see fit, with no central oversight. Option B. Prioritize existing supplier contracts and cost effectiveness, only considering sustainability criteria if they do not impact immediate financial outcomes or supplier relationships. Option C. Immediately issue a directive to all procurement teams to strictly adhere to the new sustainability criteria in all future purchasing decisions, with no prior training or supplier consultation. Option D. Develop a comprehensive training program for procurement staff on the new sustainability criteria. Engage in open dialogue with key suppliers to explain the policy and offer support for their adaptation, and implement the policy in phases with clear communication at each stage. Correct answer is D. Develop a comprehensive training program for procurement staff on the new sustainability criteria. Engage in open dialogue with key suppliers to explain the policy and offer support for their adaptation, and implement the policy in phases with clear communication at each stage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in implementing a new procurement policy within Elior Group, specifically concerning the integration of sustainability criteria. The professional challenge lies in balancing the directive from senior management to embed these criteria with the practical realities of existing supplier relationships and the potential for resistance or misunderstanding among procurement teams. Ensuring compliance with Elior's internal policies and any relevant industry best practices for responsible sourcing, without causing undue disruption or alienating key partners, requires careful communication, training, and phased implementation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured and collaborative implementation strategy. This includes clear communication of the policy's objectives and requirements to all stakeholders, providing comprehensive training to procurement staff on how to assess and integrate sustainability metrics, and engaging with existing suppliers to explain the changes and offer support for them to adapt. This method aligns with best professional practices by fostering transparency, enabling informed decision-making, and promoting a culture of continuous improvement in responsible business conduct. It ensures that the implementation is not merely a top-down mandate, but a shared effort, increasing the likelihood of successful adoption and long-term adherence to Elior's sustainability goals. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately enforcing the new policy without prior communication or training. This would likely lead to confusion, errors in supplier selection, and potential breaches of contract if suppliers are unable to meet the new, uncommunicated criteria. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of consideration for the impact on both internal teams and external partners, potentially damaging supplier relationships and fostering an environment of non-compliance due to a lack of understanding. Another incorrect approach is to delegate the implementation entirely to individual procurement officers without providing clear guidelines or oversight. This can result in inconsistent application of the policy, with some teams adopting it rigorously while others ignore it, leading to a fragmented and ineffective sustainability integration. This approach fails to uphold professional standards of accountability and consistent policy application. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize cost savings above all else, effectively sidelining the sustainability criteria when they might increase initial procurement costs. This undermines the very purpose of the new policy and signals to the organization that sustainability is a secondary concern, contradicting Elior's stated commitment. This approach represents an ethical failure to act in accordance with the company's stated values and strategic objectives. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with implementing new policies should adopt a phased, communicative, and supportive approach. This involves understanding the policy's intent, assessing the current state, identifying potential challenges, developing a clear implementation plan with measurable objectives, and ensuring adequate resources, training, communication, support, are available. Regular review and feedback mechanisms are crucial for adapting the approach as needed and ensuring sustained compliance and effectiveness. Question 2. What factors determine the effectiveness of a risk assessment process within a company like Elior Group, considering its operational scope and regulatory environment? Option A. The number of risk management policies documented, irrespective of their practical implementation. Option B, the speed at which new risks are identified and reported without considering their potential severity. Option C, the frequency of internal audits, regardless of the scope or depth of identified risks. Option D, the comprehensiveness of risk identification, the rigor of impact and likelihood analysis, and the clarity of mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D, the comprehensiveness of risk identification, the rigor of impact and likelihood analysis, and the clarity of mitigation strategies. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment within the specific context of Elior Group's operations, which likely involves food service, catering, and facilities management. The challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing risks that could impact the company's reputation, financial stability, operational continuity, and compliance with relevant UK regulations. Assuming this is the jurisdiction for the Elior Group hiring assessment test. A superficial approach to risk assessment can lead to overlooking critical vulnerabilities, resulting in significant financial losses, regulatory penalties, or reputational damage. The dynamic nature of the business environment, including changing consumer preferences, supply chain disruptions, and evolving health and safety standards, necessitates continuous and adaptive risk assessment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of potential risks, considering both their likelihood and potential impact. This includes identifying operational risks, e.g., food safety incidents, equipment failure, financial risks, e.g., cost overruns, contract noncompliance, strategic risks, e.g., market shifts, competitor actions, and compliance risks, e.g., breaches of health and safety legislation, data protection violations. A robust risk assessment framework, aligned with UK regulatory expectations such as those from the Health and Safety Executive (HSE) and the Food Standards Agency (FSA), would involve establishing clear risk criteria, employing appropriate assessment methodologies, qualitative and quantitative, and ensuring that identified risks are documented, prioritized, and assigned to responsible individuals for mitigation. This proactive and structured approach ensures that Elior Group can effectively manage its exposure to potential threats, safeguard its stakeholders, and maintain its license to operate. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on immediate financial gains without considering the associated risks, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the potential for long-term damage to the company's reputation and financial health, which could arise from non-compliance with health and safety regulations or poor service delivery. It also fails to address the duty of care owed to customers and employees, prioritizing only the most visible or frequently discussed risks, while ignoring less obvious but potentially catastrophic ones, represents a failure in due diligence. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization vulnerable to unforeseen events. Regulatory frameworks often require a comprehensive and systematic approach to risk identification, not just a reactive one based on current media attention. Adopting a purely reactive approach, where risks are only addressed after an incident has occurred, is a critical failure. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and a disregard for preventative measures. Regulatory bodies expect organizations to have robust risk management systems in place to anticipate and mitigate potential harm before it materializes. This reactive stance can lead to significant legal liabilities and operational disruptions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured and holistic risk assessment process. This begins with defining the scope and objectives of the assessment, followed by systematic risk identification across all operational areas. Once identified, risks should be analyzed for their likelihood and impact, using appropriate qualitative and quantitative tools. Prioritization of risks based on their severity is crucial, enabling the allocation of resources to the most critical areas. The development and implementation of mitigation strategies, coupled with ongoing monitoring and review, form the final stages of a robust risk management cycle. This process should be embedded within the company's culture and governance structures, ensuring that risk management is an integral part of strategic decision-making and day-to-day operations, in line with UK legal and ethical standards. Question 3. When evaluating the implementation of a new employee time and attendance tracking system designed to reduce operational costs, What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and ethical employee treatment? Option A. Inform employees about the new system and begin implementation, assuming their consent due to their employment status. Option B. Focus solely on the technical specifications of the system to ensure efficiency, deferring any data privacy considerations to the IT department. Option C. Proceed with selecting and implementing the most cost-effective system immediately to realize savings, addressing any data concerns as they arise. Option D. Conduct a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate potential risks to employee privacy before system selection and implementation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate potential risks to employee privacy for system selection and implementation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a business with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations concerning employee welfare and data privacy. The pressure to quickly implement cost-saving measures can lead to shortcuts that compromise these critical areas. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any changes are implemented in a manner that is both compliant with relevant regulations and ethically sound, protecting both the company's reputation and its employees. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, compliant, and ethical process. This involves understanding the specific data protection regulations applicable to Elior Group, assuming UK jurisdiction for this assessment. Therefore, GDPR and the Data Protection Act 2018 are paramount. It necessitates a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate risks associated with processing employee data, especially when implementing new technologies for time and attendance. This proactive approach ensures that employee privacy is respected, data is handled securely, and the company avoids potential regulatory penalties and reputational damage. It also demonstrates a commitment to employee trust and fair treatment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate cost savings without considering data protection implications is professionally unacceptable. This would likely violate GDPR principles such as data minimization, purpose limitation, and accountability. Specifically, failing to conduct a DPIA before implementing a new system that collects sensitive employee data, like biometric information or detailed work patterns, could lead to unauthorized access, data breaches, and misuse of personal information. This constitutes a significant regulatory failure and an ethical breach, as it disregards the fundamental rights of employees to privacy and data security. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing a system without clear communication or consent from employees is also professionally unacceptable. This violates the transparency and fairness principles of GDPR. Employees have a right to know what data is being collected about them, why it is being collected, and how it will be used and protected. Lack of transparency erodes trust and can lead to grievances and legal challenges. Ethically, it is exploitative to collect data without informed consent, especially when it relates to an individual's employment. The professional reasoning framework for professionals in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment and compliance check. First, identify the core business objective, cost savings. Second, identify all potential regulatory frameworks and ethical considerations relevant to the proposed action, e.g., data protection, employment law, company policies. Third, conduct a thorough impact assessment including a DPIA if personal data is involved. Fourth, consult with relevant stakeholders, including legal and HR departments and potentially employee representatives. Fifth, develop and implement the solution in a phased, transparent, and compliant manner with clear communication and ongoing monitoring. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are met without compromising legal obligations or ethical standards. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates a significant increase in data capture from employee workstations, including keystroke logging and screen recording, ostensibly to improve productivity and identify potential security breaches. However, the internal policy on employee monitoring is several years old and lacks specific details on the scope and purpose of such extensive data collection. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response to this situation, considering UK regulatory frameworks and ethical best practices? Option A. Continue the current level of data capture, assuming it is justified by the potential for productivity gains and security improvements, and update the internal policy retrospectively to reflect the current practices. Option B. Proceed with the enhanced data capture, focusing on the security breach aspect, and only address employee concerns if they arise, as the company has a right to protect its assets. Option C. Immediately halt all data capture until a comprehensive review of the monitoring system, its necessity, proportionality, and compliance with the Data Protection Act 2018 and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 is completed, and employees are fully informed. Option D. Reduce data capture to only essential metrics like login/logout times, as the old policy does not explicitly permit more intrusive monitoring, and inform employees of this change. The correct answer is C. Immediately halt all data capture until a comprehensive review of the monitoring system, its necessity, proportionality, and compliance with the Data Protection Act 2018 and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 is completed, and employees are fully informed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the interpretation and application of Elior Group's internal policies and potentially relevant UK employment law regarding employee monitoring. The challenge lies in balancing the company's legitimate business interests in monitoring for operational efficiency and compliance with the employee's right to privacy and fair treatment. A failure to correctly interpret and apply these policies can lead to legal repercussions, damage to employee morale, and reputational harm. Careful judgment is required to ensure that monitoring practices are proportionate, transparent, and legally compliant. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Elior Group's documented policies on employee monitoring, cross-reference with current UK employment legislation, particularly the Data Protection Act 2018, which incorporates GDPR principles, and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, REPA. This approach ensures that any monitoring is conducted with a clear legal basis, is necessary for a legitimate purpose, and is proportionate to that purpose. Transparency with employees about the monitoring, its purpose, and the data collected is a key ethical and legal requirement. This approach prioritizes compliance, fairness, and respect for employee rights, aligning with best professional practice and regulatory expectations. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the operational efficiency gains without considering the legal and ethical implications of employee monitoring would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely violate data protection principles by potentially collecting excessive or irrelevant data, failing to inform employees adequately, and lacking a clear, lawful basis for the monitoring. Such an approach risks contravening the Data Protection Act 2018 by infringing on individuals' privacy rights. Another incorrect approach would be to implement monitoring based on anecdotal evidence or assumptions about employee misconduct without a clear, documented policy or legal justification. This could lead to arbitrary or discriminatory monitoring, which is ethically unsound and could violate employment law by creating a hostile work environment or breaching implied terms of trust and confidence. An approach that relies on outdated or vaguely worded internal policies without verifying their current legal standing or compliance with evolving data protection regulations is also professionally flawed. This could result in non-compliance with current legislation, leading to potential fines and legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific context and the relevant regulatory framework. This involves identifying the objectives of the monitoring, assessing its necessity and proportionality, and ensuring transparency. A key step is to consult internal policies and seek legal advice if there is any ambiguity regarding compliance with UK law. Documenting the rationale for the monitoring and the procedures in place is crucial for accountability and defense against potential challenges. Regular review of monitoring practices against legal and ethical standards is also essential. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that when faced with a proposal to significantly reduce catering costs by sourcing ingredients from a new supplier with questionable labor practices, a manager must decide on the best course of action. Which approach best reflects a responsible and ethical decision-making process within Elior Group's operational and ethical guidelines? Option A. Immediately approve the proposal to achieve significant cost saving, as the primary objective is to improve the company's financial performance. Option B. Reject the proposal outright due to the potential reputational damage and ethical concerns, without further investigation into the supplier's practices. Option C. Delegate the decision to a subordinate to avoid personal responsibility for a potentially controversial choice. Option D. Initiate a thorough due diligence process on the new supplier, assessing their labor practices, quality control, and compliance with relevant ethical sourcing standards, while also evaluating the financial benefits and potential risks. The correct answer is A. Immediately approve the proposal to achieve significant cost savings, as the primary objective is to improve the company's financial performance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term strategic goals and ethical considerations, all within the framework of Elior Group's established decision-making processes. The pressure to deliver results quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise quality or ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not only effective in the short term, but also sustainable and aligned with the company's values and regulatory obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-based decision-making framework that aligns with Elior Group's internal guidelines and any applicable external regulations. This involves clearly defining the problem, gathering relevant information, considering multiple perspectives, evaluating potential solutions against defined criteria, including ethical and regulatory compliance, and documenting the rationale for the chosen course of action. This systematic process minimizes bias, ensures accountability, and promotes robust, defensible decisions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without considering the potential impact on service quality or employee morale represents a failure to adhere to a holistic decision-making process. This could lead to regulatory breaches if cost-cutting measures violate employment law or health and safety regulations. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment could expose the company to reputational damage or financial penalties if unforeseen issues arise due to inadequate planning. A third incorrect approach that relies on personal intuition or the opinions of a few individuals without broader consultation or data analysis fails to leverage the collective expertise within the organization and can lead to biased or suboptimal outcomes, potentially overlooking critical compliance requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objective and the context. This involves identifying all stakeholders and their potential interests. Next, information should be gathered from reliable sources, and potential options should be brainstormed. Each option should then be evaluated against a set of criteria, including feasibility, cost-effectiveness, alignment with company strategy, ethical implications, and regulatory compliance. Finally, the chosen option should be implemented, monitored, and reviewed. This structured approach ensures that decisions are well considered, justifiable, and contribute to the overall success and integrity of the organization. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal a significant and sustained increase in operational costs within a key service division. Management is under pressure to implement immediate cost-saving strategies to improve profitability. Considering the stakeholder perspective, which of the following approaches best balances financial necessity with ethical and regulatory responsibilities? Option A. Immediately implement a series of staff redundancies and renegotiate client contracts to reduce service scope, focusing solely on achieving the target cost reduction within the current financial quarter. Option B. Delay any significant cost-saving decisions until the next financial year, hoping that market conditions will improve and reduce the need for drastic measures, while continuing to monitor the cost increases. Option C. Outsource a substantial portion of the division's core functions to a third-party provider with a lower cost base, without consulting existing staff or clients about the potential implications. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of operational processes, engaging with employee representatives and client liaison teams to identify cost efficiencies that do not compromise service quality or employee well-being, while ensuring full compliance with employment law and contractual terms. Correct answer is A. Immediately implement a series of staff redundancies and renegotiate client contracts to reduce service scope, focusing solely on achieving the target cost reduction within the current financial quarter. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost reduction with the long-term implications for stakeholder relationships and regulatory compliance. Elior Group, as a service provider, relies heavily on trust and consistent service delivery. A decision perceived as solely cost-driven, without adequate consideration for its impact on employees and clients, can erode this trust, leading to reputational damage and potential contractual disputes. The challenge lies in identifying a solution that is financially prudent yet ethically sound and compliant with relevant employment and service contract regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes open communication and collaborative problem-solving with affected stakeholders, particularly employees and clients. This aligns with best professional practice by demonstrating transparency, respect for individuals, and a commitment to maintaining service quality. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, this approach acknowledges the duty of care owed to employees under employment law, e.g., consultation requirements, fair dismissal procedures if applicable, and contractual obligations to clients. It fosters a proactive rather than reactive stance, mitigating risks of legal challenges and preserving goodwill. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves unilaterally implementing cost-saving measures without prior consultation or notification to employees. This fails to comply with employment legislation that often mandates consultation on significant changes affecting staff, such as redundancies or changes to terms and conditions. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for employee welfare and can lead to claims of unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize immediate cost savings by reducing service quality or scope without informing clients. This breaches contractual obligations and can lead to client dissatisfaction, contract termination, and reputational damage. It also fails to uphold ethical standards of honesty and integrity in business dealings. A third incorrect approach might be to seek external consultants to devise a cost-cutting strategy without involving internal management or employee representatives. While consultants can offer expertise, bypassing internal knowledge and stakeholder input can lead to impractical or poorly received solutions, and it neglects the ethical imperative of involving those directly impacted by the decisions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation and its potential impacts on all stakeholders. This involves gathering data, understanding regulatory requirements, e.g., employment law, contract law, and identifying ethical considerations. The next step is to explore a range of potential solutions, evaluating each against criteria of financial viability, operational feasibility, regulatory compliance, and stakeholder impact. Open communication and consultation with affected parties are crucial throughout this process to gather feedback, build consensus, and ensure that the chosen solution is both effective and sustainable. Question 7. The assessment process reveals that a critical Elior Group project is entering its implementation phase with a tight deadline. The project manager is considering bypassing a formal confirmation of all stakeholder approvals and detailed feedback on the latest implementation plan, opting instead to proceed directly with execution based on initial broad agreements, with the intention of providing a comprehensive update only upon completion of major milestones. What is the most professionally responsible approach to managing stakeholder engagement during this implementation phase? Option A. Prioritize the project deadline by implementing the plan as initially conceived and communicate any significant deviations or issues to stakeholders only if they directly impact the project's ultimate success. Option B. Assume that the initial broad agreements are sufficient and focus communication efforts on a single, detailed report to be distributed to all stakeholders at the project's conclusion. Option C. Proceed with implementation based on initial broad agreements, focusing on meeting the deadline, and provide a comprehensive update to all stakeholders only after all major implementation milestones have been achieved. Option D. Proactively engage with all relevant stakeholders to confirm specific approvals and gather detailed feedback on the latest implementation plan before proceeding with major execution steps, and establish a schedule for regular, transparent updates throughout the implementation. The correct answer is D. Proactively engage with all relevant stakeholders to confirm specific approvals and gather detailed feedback on the latest implementation plan before proceeding with major execution steps, and establish a schedule for regular, transparent updates throughout the implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient project implementation with the ethical obligation to ensure all stakeholders are adequately informed and have the opportunity to provide input. The pressure to meet deadlines can lead to shortcuts that compromise transparency and fairness, potentially leading to future disputes or dissatisfaction. Careful judgment is required to identify the point where efficiency becomes detrimental to ethical conduct and stakeholder engagement. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes proactive and inclusive communication throughout the implementation phase. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and ethical project management, which emphasize transparency and stakeholder engagement. By establishing clear communication channels and providing regular updates, the project team demonstrates respect for stakeholders' interests and allows for timely feedback, mitigating risks of misunderstanding or opposition. This approach fosters trust and collaboration, ultimately contributing to a more successful and sustainable outcome. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with implementation without confirming all necessary approvals and stakeholder buy-in. This is a direct violation of good governance practices and can lead to significant project delays, cost overruns, and reputational damage if key stakeholders later object or withdraw support. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of respect for the decision-making authority of others and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent proper procedures. Another incorrect approach is to only communicate with stakeholders after significant implementation milestones have been reached. This reactive approach limits the ability of stakeholders to influence the project's direction and can lead to frustration if their concerns are raised too late to be addressed effectively. It suggests a lack of genuine engagement and can be perceived as a superficial attempt to inform rather than to collaborate. This can erode trust and create an adversarial relationship. A third incorrect approach is to assume that a single, broad communication to all stakeholders at the outset is sufficient. While initial communication is important, project implementation often involves evolving details and potential challenges that require ongoing dialogue. Failing to provide regular, tailored updates can leave stakeholders feeling out of the loop and unable to contribute meaningfully or to raise concerns in a timely manner. This can lead to a perception of a lack of diligence and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and iterative approach to stakeholder communication during project implementation. This involves developing a clear communication plan that outlines regular touchpoints, feedback mechanisms, and escalation procedures. Before initiating significant implementation steps, it is crucial to confirm that all required approvals are in place and that key stakeholders have had the opportunity to voice their concerns and provide input. When challenges arise, they should be communicated transparently and promptly to relevant parties, along with proposed solutions. This systematic approach ensures that projects are not only executed efficiently, but also ethically and with the sustained support of all involved parties. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that Elior Group is implementing a new sustainability reporting framework. Given the potential for significant operational changes and data integration challenges, which approach to implementation is most likely to ensure both timely adoption and robust compliance with relevant reporting regulations? Option A. A technology-centric implementation, focusing solely on updating IT systems to capture new data points, with operational teams expected to adapt their processes independently. Option B. An immediate company-wide rollout of the new framework, relying on existing operational procedures and minimal additional training to expedite the process. Option C. A top-down directive mandating immediate adherence to all new reporting requirements, with enforcement through performance reviews and sanctions for non-compliance. Option D. A phased implementation strategy involving pilot testing in select departments, followed by iterative refinement based on feedback and stakeholder engagement before a full rollout. The correct answer is D. A phased implementation strategy involving pilot testing in select departments, followed by iterative refinement based on feedback and stakeholder engagement before a full rollout. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient operational implementation of a new sustainability reporting framework with the imperative to ensure data accuracy and compliance with evolving regulatory expectations. The pressure to meet deadlines, coupled with the inherent complexity of integrating new data points and processes, creates a risk of superficial adoption rather than genuine, robust implementation. Careful judgment is required to avoid shortcuts that could lead to misreporting or non-compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, focusing on phased implementation with pilot testing and stakeholder engagement, represents best professional practice because it aligns with principles of good governance and regulatory compliance. This method allows for iterative refinement of processes, identification and mitigation of potential data integrity issues before full rollout, and ensures that all relevant parties understand and can execute their roles. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of regulatory breaches by building a solid foundation of accurate data collection and reporting, thereby demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to transparency as expected by regulatory bodies overseeing corporate reporting. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, such as a rapid, top-down rollout without adequate testing or training, risks significant regulatory and ethical failures. This could lead to inaccurate data submission, which violates reporting obligations and potentially misleads stakeholders, including investors and regulators. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of commitment to the principles of accurate and transparent reporting. Another incorrect approach might involve relying solely on existing IT infrastructure without assessing its capacity to handle new sustainability data requirements. This could result in data loss, system failures, or an inability to generate the required reports, leading to noncompliance with specific data submission mandates. It also fails to uphold the ethical duty to implement systems that can reliably support reporting obligations. Finally, an approach that bypasses key internal stakeholders, such as operational teams responsible for data generation, in favor of a purely IT-driven solution, is also flawed. This can lead to a disconnect between reporting requirements and actual data collection capabilities, resulting in incomplete or inaccurate data. It undermines the collaborative effort necessary for effective compliance and demonstrates a failure to engage with those who hold the primary responsibility for data accuracy. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such implementation challenges should adopt a structured, risk-based approach. This involves 1. Clearly defining the scope and objectives of the implementation, referencing specific regulatory requirements. 2. Conducting a thorough assessment of existing processes and systems to identify gaps. 3. Developing a phased implementation plan that includes pilot programs and feedback loops. 4. Ensuring comprehensive training and communication for all involved personnel. 5. Establishing robust data validation and quality control mechanisms. 6. Regularly reviewing progress against regulatory timelines and objectives, and being prepared to adapt the plan as needed. This systematic process ensures that implementation is not only efficient, but also compliant and ethically sound. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal a consistent delay in meal preparation and delivery at a key Elior Group catering site, impacting client satisfaction scores. Management is under pressure to reduce operational costs. Which of the following represents the most effective and professionally responsible approach to address this issue? Option A. Implement a new, complex scheduling software system for the kitchen and delivery teams without prior testing or staff training, believing it will automatically streamline operations. Option B. Immediately reduce the number of kitchen staff scheduled during peak preparation times to lower labor expenses, assuming this will expedite workflow through increased individual focus. Option C. Instruct the catering team to prioritize speed over adherence to all preparation steps, with the understanding that minor deviations in presentation or ingredient handling are acceptable to meet delivery deadlines. Option D. Conduct a thorough analysis of the current meal preparation and delivery workflow, involving kitchen staff and delivery personnel, to identify bottlenecks and areas for improvement, and then propose targeted process adjustments and training. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough analysis of the current meal preparation and delivery workflow, involving kitchen staff and delivery personnel, to identify bottlenecks and areas for improvement, and then propose targeted process adjustments and training. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing immediate cost-saving pressures with the long-term imperative of maintaining service quality and regulatory compliance. The pressure to reduce operational expenses can lead to shortcuts that compromise established processes, potentially impacting client satisfaction, employee morale, and adherence to Elior Group standards and any relevant industry regulations concerning food safety and service delivery. The need for swift action without thorough evaluation creates a risk of implementing suboptimal or non-compliant solutions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the existing process to identify the root cause of inefficiencies and then implementing targeted improvements. This aligns with best practices in process optimization, which emphasize data-driven decision-making and a holistic understanding of the workflow. By engaging stakeholders and considering the impact on all aspects of the operation, including quality and compliance, this method ensures that changes are sustainable and beneficial in the long run. It upholds professional responsibility by prioritizing effective and compliant solutions over superficial cost reductions. This approach is implicitly supported by general principles of good business practice and operational excellence, which are expected within a regulated environment like the food service industry, even without specific regulatory citations. For this particular scenario, incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately cutting staff hours to reduce labor costs. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it can lead to understaffing, compromising service quality, increasing the risk of errors, e.g., in food preparation or hygiene, and potentially violating labor laws regarding working hours and employee well-being. It prioritizes short-term financial gain over operational integrity and employee welfare. Another incorrect approach is to implement a new, unproven technology without adequate testing or training. This is professionally unsound as it risks disrupting existing workflows, leading to further inefficiencies, potential data breaches, if applicable, and non-compliance with operational standards. It fails to demonstrate due diligence and a responsible approach to change management. A third incorrect approach is to simply ignore the quality control findings and continue with the current processes, hoping the issues resolve themselves. This is a failure of professional responsibility and potentially a breach of internal company policy and any applicable industry standards that mandate continuous improvement and responsiveness to quality issues. It demonstrates a lack of proactive management and a disregard for client satisfaction and operational excellence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the problem thoroughly through data and stakeholder input. They should then evaluate potential solutions based on their effectiveness, efficiency, cost-benefit, and crucially, their impact on quality, safety, and compliance. A phased implementation with pilot testing and continuous monitoring is advisable. Ethical considerations, such as employee well-being and client satisfaction, must be integrated into the decision-making process, not treated as afterthoughts. Question 10. Compliance review shows that a client who has a moderate risk tolerance and limited investment experience is expressing strong interest in a highly speculative and volatile investment product that promises aggressive short-term gains. The client explicitly states they want to invest a significant portion of their portfolio in this product. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor in this situation? Option A. Advise the client that the speculative product is too risky and refuse to discuss it further, suggesting they seek advice elsewhere if they are insistent. Option B. Present the speculative product as the only way to achieve the client's desired aggressive returns, highlighting its potential upside while downplaying the associated risks. Option C. Immediately invest the client's funds in the speculative product as requested to ensure client satisfaction and avoid potential loss of business. Option D. Thoroughly explain the risks and potential downsides of the speculative product. Assess its suitability against the client's stated risk tolerance and experience, and if deemed unsuitable, propose alternative investments that align with the client's profile and objectives. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly explain the risks and potential downsides of the speculative product, assess its suitability against the client's stated risk tolerance and experience, and if deemed unsuitable, propose alternative investments that align with the client's profile and objectives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific investment outcome and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preferred strategy carries a higher risk profile than recommended. The advisor must navigate the client's potentially uninformed enthusiasm for a high-risk, high-reward product against the regulatory imperative to ensure suitability and prevent mis-selling. The professional challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the advisor's responsibility to provide objective, risk-appropriate advice. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering to regulatory requirements for suitability. This involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge of investments. By explaining the risks and potential downsides of the client's preferred investment, and then proposing an alternative that aligns better with their profile, the advisor fulfills their fiduciary duty. This approach is justified by regulations such as the FCA's Conduct of Business Sourcebook, COBS, in the UK, which mandates that firms must act honestly, fairly, and professionally in accordance with the best interests of their clients, and ensure that any investment recommendation is suitable for the client. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately proceeding with the client's preferred investment without further due diligence. This fails to meet the suitability requirements mandated by regulatory bodies. It can lead to significant client losses, reputational damage for the firm, and potential regulatory sanctions for failing to act in the client's best interests and for mis-selling. Ethically, it prioritizes client satisfaction over client welfare. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without a proper explanation or offering alternatives. While it might stem from a desire to protect the client, it can alienate the client and be perceived as patronizing or unhelpful. This approach fails to engage the client in a constructive dialogue about their financial goals and risk appetite, potentially leading to the client seeking advice elsewhere or making uninformed decisions independently. It also misses an opportunity to educate the client. A third incorrect approach is to present the high-risk investment as the only viable option to meet the client's aggressive return expectations, without adequately disclosing the associated risks or exploring less risky alternatives. This misrepresents the investment landscape and fails to provide a balanced view, potentially leading the client to invest in something they do not fully understand or that is inappropriate for their circumstances. This is a direct violation of disclosure and suitability rules. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric approach that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's needs and circumstances. This involves active listening, probing questions, and a clear explanation of investment principles, risks, and rewards. When a client expresses a preference for a particular investment, the professional's duty is to evaluate its suitability against the client's profile. If it's unsuitable, the professional must clearly articulate the reasons why, referencing specific risks and how they conflict with the client's profile. Crucially, they must then offer suitable alternatives that aim to achieve similar objectives with an appropriate level of risk. This process fosters trust, ensures regulatory compliance, and upholds ethical standards by prioritizing the client's long-term financial well-being. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that a particular food preparation process is taking significantly longer than anticipated, leading to potential delays in service. However, the proposed shortcut to expedite this process, as suggested by the study's initial output, bypasses a standard quality control check that is implicitly expected in food handling environments. What is the most appropriate next step for the operations manager? Option A. Ignore the efficiency study's findings, as the current process has been in place for a long time without major issues. Option B. Immediately implement the proposed shortcut to address the identified delays and improve service speed. Option C. Implement the shortcut but instruct staff to be extra vigilant during other stages of the service to compensate for the bypass check. Option D. Conduct a detailed investigation into the root causes of the current process duration, involving frontline staff and reviewing existing standard operating procedures before considering any modifications. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed investigation into the root causes of the current process duration, involving frontline staff and reviewing existing standard operating procedures before considering any modifications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where initial findings suggest a significant deviation from established best practices. The professional's task is to interpret these findings and recommend a course of action that balances efficiency gains with adherence to Elior Group's operational standards and relevant regulatory guidelines. The challenge lies in distinguishing between genuine opportunities for improvement and potential shortcuts that could compromise quality, safety, or compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the root causes of the identified inefficiencies. This includes gathering detailed data, consulting with frontline staff who execute the processes, and comparing current practices against documented standard operating procedures, SOP, and any applicable industry best practices or regulatory mandates relevant to food service operations. This methodical approach ensures that any proposed changes are well-informed, sustainable, and do not inadvertently introduce risks. It aligns with professional ethics by prioritizing thoroughness, data-driven decision-making, and a commitment to maintaining high operational standards, which indirectly supports compliance with health and safety regulations and customer service expectations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately implement the proposed changes based solely on the initial efficiency study's output without further validation. This bypasses critical steps of root cause analysis and stakeholder consultation. Such an action could lead to unintended consequences, such as reduced food quality, increased risk of cross-contamination, or non-compliance with health and safety regulations, all of which are subject to regulatory oversight in the food service industry. This demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for established protocols. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the efficiency study's findings outright without any investigation. This demonstrates a resistance to change and a potential failure to identify genuine opportunities for improvement that could enhance service delivery and operational effectiveness. It could also indicate a lack of commitment to continuous improvement, core principle in professional management, and a factor often considered in performance evaluations and regulatory compliance audits. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on service quality or regulatory compliance. While efficiency often leads to cost savings, a myopic focus on this aspect can lead to compromises in areas that are critical for customer satisfaction and legal adherence, such as food safety standards or staffing levels required to maintain hygiene. This approach fails to consider the holistic impact of process changes. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured problem-solving framework. This typically involves 1. Understanding the problem, clearly define the inefficiencies identified. 2. Gathering information, collect data, consult stakeholders, and review existing procedures and regulations. 3. Analyzing root causes, determine why the inefficiencies exist. 4. Developing solutions, brainstorm and evaluate potential improvements. 5. Implementing solutions, plan and execute changes carefully. 6. Monitoring and evaluating, track the impact of changes and make adjustments as needed. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and aligned with organizational goals and regulatory requirements. Question 12. Operational review demonstrates that a new software tool promises to significantly reduce the time required for processing expense reports. However, the implementation team has not yet confirmed if this tool fully complies with Elior Group's internal data retention policies and the specific reporting standards mandated by relevant financial regulations. What is the most prudent next step to ensure both process optimization and regulatory adherence? Option A. Prioritize the automation of expense report processing based on the potential for immediate cost savings, deferring any detailed compliance checks until after the system is fully operational. Option B. Implement the software tool and address any potential data retention or regulatory compliance issues retrospectively as they arise. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the software tool immediately to realize the projected cost savings, assuming the vendor's claims of compliance are accurate. Option D. Conduct a thorough validation of the software tool against Elior Group's data retention policies and relevant financial regulations before proceeding with implementation. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough validation of the software tool against Elior Group's data retention policies and relevant financial regulations before proceeding with implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization where a proposed solution, while seemingly efficient, carries significant risks related to data integrity and compliance. The professional challenge lies in balancing the desire for improved operational speed with the absolute necessity of adhering to Elior Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks governing data handling and reporting. Failure to do so could lead to inaccurate financial reporting, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough validation of the proposed automation tool against existing data governance policies and regulatory requirements before implementation. This ensures that any new process aligns with established standards for data accuracy, security, and auditability. It reflects best professional practice by embedding a risk-aware and compliance-first mindset into the optimization process. This proactive stance prevents potential breaches and ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the cost of integrity or legality. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the automation tool without verifying its compliance with data governance policies is a direct violation of internal controls and potentially external regulations. This approach risks introducing errors or inconsistencies into financial data, leading to non-compliance and audit failures. It demonstrates a disregard for established procedures designed to protect the company's financial integrity. Focusing solely on the cost savings of the automation tool, without considering its impact on data accuracy or regulatory adherence, is a failure of due diligence. This approach prioritizes short-term financial benefits over long-term operational stability and compliance, which is professionally irresponsible and ethically questionable. It ignores the potential for much larger financial and reputational costs arising from noncompliance. Adopting the automation tool based on the vendor's assurance alone, without independent verification or testing within Elior's specific operational context, is a significant oversight. Professional practice demands that companies conduct their own due diligence to ensure that third-party solutions meet their unique requirements and regulatory obligations. Relying solely on vendor claims can lead to unforeseen issues and liabilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing process optimization opportunities must adopt a structured decision-making framework. This involves 1. Clearly defining the objectives of the optimization, including efficiency gains and desired outcomes. 2. Identifying all relevant internal policies, procedures, and external regulatory requirements that the proposed change might impact. 3. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment, evaluating potential impacts on data integrity, security, compliance, and operational continuity. 4. Evaluating proposed solutions against these identified requirements and risks, prioritizing those that demonstrate a clear path to achieving objectives while maintaining compliance. 5. Implementing a phased approach with rigorous testing and validation before full deployment. 6. Establishing ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms to ensure continued compliance and effectiveness. Question 13. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of operational realities and potential ethical considerations. Imagine you are a manager at Elior Group in the UK. You discover that a supplier, with whom you have a significant contract, has been consistently overcharging the company for certain services, albeit by small amounts on each invoice, which collectively amount to a substantial sum over a year. Your immediate supervisor is aware of this and has indicated that it's part of the cost of doing business, and that raising it could jeopardize a valuable supplier relationship and impact your team's performance metrics for the quarter. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Discreetly inform the supplier of your findings and attempt to negotiate a retroactive refund or a future price reduction without involving any other departments. Option B. Discuss your concerns with your supervisor and accept their assessment that this is an unavoidable aspect of business, focusing instead on managing the budget to accommodate the overcharges. Option C. Continue to approve the invoices as usual to maintain the supplier relationship and avoid immediate conflict with your supervisor, hoping the issue resolves itself over time. Option D. Escalate the overcharging issue to Elior Group's internal compliance department and seek their guidance on how to proceed, ensuring all communication is documented. The correct answer is D. Escalate the overcharging issue to Elior Group's internal compliance department and seek their guidance on how to proceed, ensuring all communication is documented. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet short-term targets can tempt individuals to overlook or downplay potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to balance stakeholder expectations, legal compliance, and the company's reputation. The correct approach, which involves reporting the potential issue to the compliance department and seeking guidance, represents best professional practice because it adheres to the principles of transparency, accountability, and due diligence. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate reporting of potential noncompliance and ethical misconduct. It prioritizes adherence to the Elior Group's internal policies and relevant UK regulations, ensuring that any potential issues are addressed proactively and in accordance with legal and ethical standards. This approach safeguards the company from future penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach of ignoring the issue or attempting to resolve it independently without involving the appropriate channels would be professionally unacceptable. Ignoring the issue constitutes a failure to uphold professional integrity and could lead to significant regulatory breaches if the practice is indeed non-compliant. Attempting to resolve it independently bypasses established internal controls and compliance procedures, which are designed to ensure adherence to regulations and ethical standards. This could result in an inadequate or improper resolution, potentially exacerbating the problem and exposing the company to legal and financial repercussions. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of respect for the established governance structures and the expertise of the compliance department. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the potential ethical or regulatory issue. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and codes of conduct. 3. Seeking guidance from the compliance department or legal counsel. 4. Documenting all actions and communications. 5. Acting with integrity and prioritizing the long-term well-being of the company and its stakeholders over short-term gains. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a newly identified operational risk related to data integrity in a minor customer feedback system as a medium-low priority. However, internal analysis suggests this system, if compromised, could indirectly impact customer loyalty and brand reputation over the medium to long term, even though direct financial loss is currently assessed as minimal. What is the most appropriate next step for the risk management team? Option A. Immediately allocate significant resources to implement advanced data security protocols for the system. Option B. Close the risk as it does not currently meet the threshold for immediate action on the risk matrix. Option C. Escalate the risk for further qualitative assessment and potential inclusion in the next strategic risk review cycle. Option D. Document the risk and monitor it passively without further active investigation until its priority level increases. The correct answer is C. Escalate the risk for further qualitative assessment and potential inclusion in the next strategic risk review cycle. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in risk management where a newly identified risk, while not immediately critical based on the current matrix, has the potential for significant future impact. The professional challenge lies in balancing immediate resource allocation with proactive risk mitigation for emerging threats. Elior Group, as a large organization, must adhere to its internal risk management policies and relevant UK regulatory guidance, such as that provided by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, or the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, depending on the nature of the risk. The correct approach involves escalating the risk for further investigation and potential inclusion in future risk assessments and mitigation plans. This aligns with best professional practice by demonstrating a forward-thinking and comprehensive approach to risk management. It acknowledges that risks can evolve and that early identification and assessment are crucial for preventing future issues. Ethically, it upholds the duty of care to stakeholders by proactively managing potential threats to the business, its employees, and its customers. Regulatory frameworks often mandate robust risk assessment and management processes, requiring firms to consider not just current but also potential future risks. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the risk solely because it does not currently fall into a high-priority category on the matrix. This fails to recognize the dynamic nature of risk and could lead to regulatory breaches if the risk materializes and was not adequately considered. It also represents an ethical failure by neglecting potential harm to the organization and its stakeholders. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately implement costly mitigation measures without further analysis. This is professionally unsound as it represents inefficient resource allocation and may not be the most effective solution. It also bypasses the established risk assessment process, potentially leading to misallocation of resources and failing to address the root cause effectively. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that involves 1. Understanding the context and potential impact of the identified risk, even if not immediately severe. 2. Consulting internal risk management policies and relevant regulatory guidance. 3. Conducting a preliminary assessment to determine if further investigation is warranted. 4. Escalating the risk for deeper analysis and potential inclusion in future strategic planning and mitigation efforts. And 5. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made. Question 15. Market research demonstrates a significant consumer interest in a new product line for Elior Group, with preliminary internal data suggesting a strong potential for positive customer feedback. However, the marketing team proposes using comparative claims against a competitor that are based on anecdotal evidence and projections rather than independently verified data. The team argues that these claims are aspirational and will drive immediate sales, citing past instances where similar, less rigorously substantiated claims were not challenged. The decision maker must determine the most appropriate course of action. Option A. Modify the marketing campaign to focus solely on the product's intrinsic benefits without making any direct or indirect comparisons to competitors, thereby avoiding the need for substantiation of comparative claims. Option B. Halt the proposed campaign and insist on independent verification of all comparative claims before any marketing materials are finalized, even if this delays the launch and potentially reduces initial sales impact. Option C. Approve the marketing campaign as proposed, focusing on the projected sales uplift and the precedent of similar past campaigns, and address any potential issues only if they arise through formal complaints. Option D. Proceed with the proposed marketing campaign, ensuring the claims are framed as potential benefits and are not absolute guarantees, while monitoring customer feedback closely for any negative reactions. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the proposed marketing campaign, ensuring the claims are framed as potential benefits and are not absolute guarantees, while monitoring customer feedback closely for any negative reactions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing competing interests: the immediate financial benefit to Elior Group versus the long-term reputational and ethical implications of a potentially misleading marketing campaign. The decision maker must navigate the gray area between aggressive sales tactics and outright deception, considering the impact on consumer trust and regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any marketing claims are substantiated and do not exploit consumer vulnerabilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency, accuracy, and consumer welfare, aligning with the ethical principles of responsible marketing and the spirit of consumer protection regulations. By seeking independent verification and ensuring claims are demonstrably true, Elior Group upholds its commitment to integrity and builds sustainable customer relationships. This proactive stance also mitigates the risk of regulatory action and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the perceived success of similar past campaigns fails to acknowledge that market conditions and regulatory expectations evolve. This approach risks violating regulations that prohibit misleading advertising, as past acceptance does not guarantee future compliance. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential harm to consumers. Another incorrect approach that focuses on the potential for increased short-term revenue, while ignoring the substantiation of claims, is ethically unsound and legally risky. It prioritizes profit over integrity, potentially leading to consumer complaints, regulatory investigations, and significant fines. It undermines the company's credibility and can result in long-term financial and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach that dismisses the need for verification due to time constraints overlooks the fundamental responsibility to ensure marketing accuracy. This demonstrates a failure to integrate ethical considerations into the decision-making process and prioritizes expediency over compliance and consumer trust. It creates a significant risk of unintentional misrepresentation, which can have severe consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that involves 1. Identifying the core issue and potential stakeholders. 2. Gathering all relevant information, including market data, regulatory requirements, and internal policies. 3. Evaluating potential courses of action against ethical principles and legal obligations. 4. Seeking expert advice when necessary, e.g., legal counsel, compliance officers. 5. making a decision that prioritizes long-term sustainability, ethical conduct, and regulatory compliance, even if it means foregoing immediate gains. Question 16. Assessment of how a junior compliance officer should respond when they overhear a senior executive discussing potentially fraudulent accounting practices during a private conversation, with no direct evidence beyond the overheard dialogue. Option A. Immediately escalate the concern to the company's external auditor and the relevant regulatory body, providing a detailed account of the overheard conversation. Option B. Discreetly gather more information and evidence. Consult with the company's internal legal counsel or compliance department for guidance on the appropriate next steps, and avoid direct confrontation with the executive. Option C. Ignore the conversation, assuming it was a misunderstanding or a hypothetical discussion, and continue with their assigned duties without further action. Option D. Directly confront the senior executive about the overheard conversation, demanding an explanation for their remarks. The correct answer is A. Immediately escalate the concern to the company's external auditor and the relevant regulatory body, providing a detailed account of the overheard conversation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client confidentiality and the potential for uncovering illegal activity. The pressure to act quickly, coupled with the uncertainty of the information's veracity, requires careful ethical and professional judgment. The core dilemma lies in balancing the duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the client against the broader societal obligation to prevent or report criminal conduct. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-based response that adheres to both ethical codes and relevant regulatory frameworks. By seeking clarification and internal guidance, the professional demonstrates due diligence and avoids making premature judgments or actions that could have severe legal or reputational consequences for themselves, the client, and the firm. This approach upholds the principles of integrity, objectivity, and professional competence. An incorrect approach that involves immediate reporting without further investigation would be professionally unacceptable. This could violate the duty of confidentiality owed to the client, potentially leading to legal repercussions and damage to the professional relationship. It also risks making a false accusation, which is unethical and damaging. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the information or dismissing it without proper consideration, would be a failure of professional duty. This could be construed as complicity or negligence, especially if the information later proves to be accurate and leads to harm. Such inaction fails to uphold the principle of integrity and could expose the professional and the firm to significant risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that involves 1. Acknowledging the information and its potential implications. 2. Gathering further facts and context without breaching confidentiality unnecessarily. 3. Consulting with appropriate internal resources, e.g., compliance, legal counsel, or, if necessary, external professional bodies for guidance. 4. Acting based on a reasoned assessment of the facts, legal obligations, and ethical principles. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with professional standards. Question 17. Comparative studies suggest that when sourcing ingredients, a company like Elior Group faces a critical decision regarding its relationship with local, smaller-scale producers versus larger, international suppliers. Considering the ethical and reputational implications of supply chain management, which approach best balances the company's financial objectives with its commitment to responsible business practices and stakeholder well-being. Option A. Focus solely on internal cost targets and proceed with sourcing decisions based on Elior's financial projections, without significant consultation or consideration of the specific challenges faced by local producers. Option B. Aggressively negotiate prices with all suppliers, including local producers, to achieve the absolute lowest cost per unit, even if it strains their financial viability. Option C. Engage with local producers to understand their pricing structures and explore collaborative opportunities for mutually beneficial agreements, while also evaluating bids from larger suppliers for comparative cost analysis. Option D. Prioritize securing the lowest possible prices by exclusively sourcing from large, international suppliers with established economies of scale, regardless of the impact on local economies. The correct answer is C. Engage with local producers to understand their pricing structures and explore collaborative opportunities for mutually beneficial agreements, while also evaluating bids from larger suppliers for comparative cost analysis. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maximizing short-term financial gains for Elior Group and upholding the long-term sustainability and ethical treatment of its supply chain partners, particularly small, local producers. The pressure to secure cost-effective ingredients can lead to decisions that disproportionately burden smaller suppliers, potentially jeopardizing their viability and Elior's reputation for corporate social responsibility. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of stakeholder interests and a commitment to ethical sourcing principles that extend beyond mere contractual obligations. Correct approach analysis. Prioritizing engagement with local producers to understand their capacity and explore mutually beneficial pricing structures represents best professional practice. This approach aligns with principles of fair trade and ethical sourcing, which are increasingly important for corporate reputation and long-term supply chain resilience. By fostering open communication and seeking collaborative solutions, Elior demonstrates a commitment to its social license to operate and build stronger, more sustainable relationships. This proactive engagement can help mitigate risks associated with supply chain disruptions and enhance brand loyalty among ethically conscious consumers. It also indirectly supports local economies, a key aspect of corporate social responsibility. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the lowest bid from large, international suppliers without considering the impact on local producers represents a failure to adhere to ethical sourcing guidelines and potentially violates principles of fair competition and responsible business conduct. This approach prioritizes immediate cost savings over long-term sustainability and stakeholder well-being, risking reputational damage and alienating ethically minded consumers. It also overlooks the potential for supply chain fragility when relying heavily on distant, large-scale providers. Negotiating aggressively to drive down prices to the absolute minimum, even if it means pushing local producers to unsustainable levels, demonstrates a disregard for fair business practices and the principle of equitable partnerships. This can lead to the exploitation of smaller suppliers, potentially resulting in their failure and a loss of valuable local sourcing options for Elior. Such actions can also attract negative attention from consumer advocacy groups and regulatory bodies concerned with fair market practices. Ignoring the concerns of local producers and proceeding with contracts based solely on Elior's internal cost targets, without seeking their input or offering alternative solutions, signifies a lack of stakeholder engagement and a failure to uphold principles of transparency and fairness. This approach can lead to resentment, damaged relationships, and a perception of Elior as an uncaring corporate entity, ultimately undermining its reputation and potentially leading to future supply chain instability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a stakeholder-centric decision-making framework. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, investors, communities, understanding their interests and concerns, and evaluating potential decisions against their impact on each group. In supply chain management, this translates to balancing cost efficiency with ethical considerations, sustainability, and relationship building. A robust process would involve due diligence on supplier practices, open communication channels, and a commitment to fair negotiation and partnership, ensuring that short-term financial objectives do not compromise long-term ethical standing and operational resilience. Question 18. Process analysis reveals that a long-standing supplier to Elior Group, with whom several key procurement managers have developed personal friendships over the years, has consistently been awarded contracts without a competitive bidding process. While the supplier's performance is generally satisfactory, there is no formal documentation to justify the absence of competitive tenders for these recurring contracts. Which of the following actions best addresses this situation from a compliance and ethical perspective? Option A. Continue awarding contracts to this supplier based on their satisfactory performance, assuming that personal friendships do not inherently constitute a conflict of interest as long as the supplier is reputable. Option B. Initiate a thorough review of all contracts awarded to this supplier, including an assessment of whether competitive bidding processes were bypassed and the rationale behind such decisions, while also reinforcing procurement policies and ethical guidelines to all relevant staff. Option C. Consider the supplier's long-standing relationship and satisfactory performance as sufficient justification for the absence of competitive bidding, and focus on other areas of potential compliance risk. Option D. Advise the procurement managers involved to be more discreet about their personal relationships with the supplier to avoid any perception of impropriety. The correct answer is B. Initiate a thorough review of all contracts awarded to this supplier, including an assessment of whether competitive bidding processes were bypassed and the rationale behind such decisions, while also reinforcing procurement policies and ethical guidelines to all relevant staff. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in a large organization like Elior Group, where maintaining consistent ethical standards and compliance across diverse operational units is paramount. The challenge lies in identifying and addressing potential conflicts of interest that could compromise the integrity of procurement processes and potentially lead to financial impropriety or reputational damage. The pressure to meet operational targets can sometimes create an environment where shortcuts are considered, making robust ethical oversight crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic review of procurement activities, focusing on identifying any relationships or transactions that could create a conflict of interest. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees within regulated industries. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to transparency, fairness, and accountability in all business dealings, which are fundamental to maintaining trust with stakeholders and adhering to internal policies and any relevant industry codes of conduct. This approach demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and risk mitigation, ensuring that procurement decisions are based on merit and value, not personal connections. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves overlooking the potential for conflicts of interest simply because no explicit policy violation has been reported. This is a reactive and insufficient stance. Ethical frameworks and compliance guidelines often require proactive identification and management of risks, not just response to confirmed breaches. Relying solely on reported violations leaves the organization vulnerable to undetected impropriety and fails to uphold a culture of ethical vigilance. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the concern as a minor issue that does not warrant further investigation, especially if the value of the transaction is perceived as small. This underestimates the cumulative impact of minor ethical lapses and the potential for such situations to escalate. It also signals a lack of commitment to the principle that ethical standards apply universally, regardless of the financial scale of a transaction. This can erode the overall ethical culture of the organization. A third incorrect approach is to assume that personal relationships between employees and suppliers are acceptable as long as the supplier is reputable. While supplier reputation is important, it does not negate the inherent risk of a conflict of interest. The focus must remain on the impartiality and fairness of the procurement process itself, ensuring that all suppliers are evaluated on objective criteria and that no preferential treatment is given due to personal connections. This approach fails to recognize that even well-intentioned personal relationships can unconsciously influence decision-making. Professional reasoning. Professionals in such situations should adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing the identification and mitigation of potential ethical and compliance risks. This involves understanding the organization's internal policies, relevant industry standards, and any applicable regulatory requirements. A key element of professional decision-making is to foster an environment where ethical concerns can be raised without fear of reprisal, and to ensure that all allegations or suspicions are investigated thoroughly and impartially. This requires a commitment to continuous improvement in compliance processes and a dedication to upholding the highest standards of integrity. Question 19. To address the challenge of safeguarding sensitive client information while facilitating necessary internal collaboration within Elior Group, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and professional best practices? Option A. Establishing a comprehensive policy that classifies information based on sensitivity and mandates specific, secure communication channels for each classification, coupled with regular employee training on data handling protocols. Option B. Encouraging the use of informal messaging platforms for all internal discussions to ensure rapid information exchange, with the assumption that employees will exercise discretion. Option C. implementing a blanket ban on all electronic communication for any information related to client accounts, requiring all such matters to be discussed in person in secure meeting rooms. Option D. Relying on individual employee awareness of data protection laws without formal company policies or training, assuming that all staff are fully informed and compliant. The correct answer is A. Establishing a comprehensive policy that classifies information based on sensitivity and mandates specific, secure communication channels for each classification, coupled with regular employee training on data handling protocols. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient internal communication with the imperative to protect sensitive client information. The rapid dissemination of information within a company is crucial for operational effectiveness, but it carries inherent risks if not managed with appropriate controls. The professional challenge lies in identifying and mitigating these risks without stifling necessary collaboration. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and client confidentiality, which are paramount in the financial services industry. By implementing a clear policy that categorizes information and dictates appropriate communication channels based on sensitivity, the company adheres to principles of data protection and client trust. This proactive measure aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations designed to prevent data breaches and maintain market integrity. It reflects best professional practice by embedding compliance into daily operations, ensuring that employees understand their responsibilities regarding sensitive data. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on informal communication channels for all internal discussions, regardless of information sensitivity. This fails to acknowledge the potential for accidental disclosure of confidential client data to unauthorized personnel, violating data protection principles, and potentially breaching client agreements. It also bypasses established compliance protocols, creating a significant regulatory risk. Another incorrect approach is to over-restrict all internal communication, making it cumbersome and inefficient. While this might seem to prioritize security, it can hinder legitimate business operations and employee collaboration. More importantly, it fails to differentiate between information requiring strict controls and that which can be shared more freely, leading to an impractical and potentially demoralizing work environment. This approach may not directly violate a specific regulation, but represents poor professional judgment in balancing security with operational needs. A third incorrect approach is to assume that all internal communication is inherently secure and requires no specific policy. This is a critical failure in understanding and implementing regulatory requirements related to data handling and confidentiality. It leaves the company vulnerable to breaches, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties due to a lack of due diligence and control. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to information management. This involves understanding the types of information handled, assessing the potential impact of its unauthorized disclosure, and implementing proportionate controls. Establishing clear, documented policies and providing regular training to employees are essential components of a robust compliance framework. When in doubt about the sensitivity of information or the appropriateness of a communication channel, professionals should err on the side of caution and consult with their compliance department. Question 20. Research into a critical project involving the transfer of sensitive customer data to a third-party vendor reveals a potential vulnerability in the vendor's security protocols that could lead to unauthorized access. The project deadline is imminent, and delaying the transfer would incur significant financial penalties and reputational damage. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Proceed with the data transfer as planned, but instruct the vendor to implement additional security measures retrospectively after the transfer is complete. Option B. Immediately halt the data transfer and initiate a formal investigation into the security vulnerability, engaging legal and compliance teams to assess the risks and determine the appropriate next steps in accordance with data protection regulations. Option C. Inform the project stakeholders of the potential vulnerability and request their decision on whether to proceed, shifting the responsibility for the risk assessment. Option D. Continue with the data transfer, assuming the risk is minimal and documenting the potential vulnerability for future review without immediate action. The correct answer is B. Immediately halt the data transfer and initiate a formal investigation into the security vulnerability, engaging legal and compliance teams to assess the risks and determine the appropriate next steps in accordance with data protection regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term ethical and regulatory compliance. The pressure to deliver a project on time, coupled with the discovery of a potential data privacy breach, creates a conflict between expediency and responsible data handling. Careful judgment is required to navigate this conflict without compromising Elior Group's reputation or violating data protection laws. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes immediate containment and thorough investigation of the data privacy issue, aligning with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and accountability as enshrined in data protection regulations. By immediately halting the data transfer and initiating a formal review, the professional demonstrates a commitment to upholding legal obligations and ethical standards, even at the risk of project delays. This proactive stance minimizes potential harm to individuals whose data may have been compromised and ensures that any future data handling is compliant. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the data transfer while planning to address the issue later fails to acknowledge the severity of a potential data breach. This constitutes a regulatory failure by potentially violating the principle of data security and failing to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to prevent unauthorized access or disclosure. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the rights and privacy of individuals whose data is involved. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the potential breach and proceed with the transfer due to time constraints, represents a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This is a direct contravention of data protection principles, particularly the obligation to protect personal data. It exposes the company to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust from clients and customers. It also fails to uphold the duty of care owed to individuals whose data is being processed. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with such dilemmas. This framework typically involves 1. Identifying the core issue and potential risks, e.g., data privacy breach, project delay. 2. Gathering all relevant information and consulting applicable policies and regulations. 3. Evaluating potential courses of action against ethical principles and legal requirements. 4. Selecting the option that best mitigates risk and upholds compliance, even if it involves short-term inconvenience. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the chosen course of action.